The ancient human warship in the Riemann Museum thrummed with power as its fusion core roared back to life, the intergalactic community watching in astonished horror as humanity's death fleet prepared to return from the grave. Commander Joshua Young of the Earth Defense Fleet had a bad feeling in his gut when he noticed the derelict human ship on display during his diplomatic tour of the Riemann capital. The reptilian aliens claimed this was the last surviving vessel from a war centuries ago where humanity was wiped out. But pieces didn't add up. Joshua snuck back into the museum that night to investigate. His instincts were right. Not only was the ship still operational, its database revealed the true history. Humanity wasn't extinct, but had fled to the stars to rebuild in secret after the war turned against them. Before he could process the revelation, alarms blared. Riemann guards flooded in, beating Joshua to the floor. Dragged before the Riemann Emperor, the human ship was seized as Joshua's encoded distress call raced towards Earth. The Emperor crowed that this was proof of mankind's warmongering ways. Humanity would finally be exterminated like they should have been long ago. Riemann battle fleets amassed on their borders as the galaxy watched to see if the mighty human empire of old would return. On Earth, the impossible message was received. Ancient wars stirred to life in the history books. Debates raged, then decision. It was time. Across the motherworld, humanity's greatest weapons were unsheathed. The Earth Defense Fleet, rusting in mothballs for generations, shuddered as reactors flared to life. Dreadnoughts that once commanded the stars rose on pillars of fusion fire. Destination, the Riemann homeworld. Objective, save Commander Young, stop the Riemanns, prevent humanity's extinction. But time was short. Failure would mean the end of mankind. Trillions of humans on Earth and her colonies would burn. The mighty ships of the defense fleet strained their engines to the breaking point, racing the clock. They had to reach Riemann space before Joshua's public execution, before the Riemann attack, before it was too late. As the fleet battled across the stars, Joshua sat shackled in a Riemann dungeon. His guard, a young officer named Sirius, hated humanity, hated the human before him. At first. Slowly, incredibly, an impossible bond began to form between captor and prisoner. Joshua's unwavering honor in the face of death fascinated Sirius, challenging a lifetime of dogma. With Joshua's fateful hour fast approaching, Sirius faced a momentous choice between heart and duty. As parsecs away, the Earth fleet burned hard for the Riemann capital, praying they could stop the annihilation of humanity in time. Joshua's heart hammered in his chest as he crept through the shadowy corridors of the Riemann dungeon, Sirius at his side. The young Riemann guard had risked everything to free him, driven by a growing respect that challenged a lifetime of hatred for humanity. "We must hurry," Sirius whispered, his reptilian eyes darting nervously. "The next patrol will pass soon." They slipped out into the night, the cool air a shock after the stifling dungeon. The spaceport was heavily guarded, but Sirius knew a vulnerability. With his insider knowledge, they slipped through a maintenance hatch, emerging near a cluster of scout ships. Alarms blared as they sprinted aboard the nearest vessel. Joshua's fingers flew over the unfamiliar controls, coaxing the engines to life. Laser blasts scorched the hull as they rocketed into the sky, Riemann ships in hot pursuit. "We need to warn your fleet," Sirius said gravely. "The Riemanns have a secret weapon, something that could annihilate your people." Joshua gritted his teeth, pushing the engines harder. They had to reach the Earth fleet first, but a warning light flashed. Fuel leak. They'd never make it. "There," Sirius pointed to a rocky moon. "We can land there for repairs." They set down in a barren crater. As Joshua sealed the leak, Sirius explored, then called out in shock. Joshua rushed over to see a faded insignia on a crumbling structure. It was the emblem of the Earth Defense Fleet. Inside the abandoned outpost, Joshua accessed the database. His heart raced at the revelations. Humanity had a far greater presence in this region than anyone knew. Then he found the schematics, weapons designs, advanced even by modern standards, tech that could turn the tide against the Riemanns. They grabbed the critical components just as Riemann ships descended on the moon. Pulse blasts shook the ground as they fled, leaping back into their stolen scout ship and blasting into space. Tensely they sped on, praying they'd reach the Earth fleet in time. Finally, they detected the massive human ships on long-range sensors. Joshua broadcast his codes, pleading for the fleet to hold fire on their Riemann ship. As they docked, Marines aimed rifles at Sirius. The Riemann held up his hands as Joshua vouched for him. On the bridge, the fleet admiral scowled mistrustfully at Sirius until Joshua showed him the outpost data. The admiral paled at the Riemann doomsday weapon. "We're still badly outmatched," the admiral said grimly as they integrated the new tech. "We need a decisive stroke." Joshua stared at the system map, an audacious plan taking form. "We use our jump drives," he said slowly. "Bypass their vanguard and strike directly at their homeworld. Hold it hostage to force a truce." The admiral looked askance at the desperate scheme, but saw no alternative. Using Sirius's knowledge of Riemann defenses, they plotted a precision jump, though the aging ships might not survive a second jump to escape. As the fleet prepared for the all-or-nothing assault, Joshua felt the weight of the moment. He was likely leading them to their deaths, but it was their only chance. Sirius stepped forward, his expression torn but resolute. "I will go ahead, infiltrate the defense grid. I can disable the security net, give your ships a chance to escape after the attack. It's the least I can do to atone for my people's crimes and to repay my debt to you, Joshua." Joshua clasped the Raymond's shoulder, words failing him. Then he turned to the admiral. "Take us in." Sirius slipped away in a shuttle as the Earth fleet hurtled towards the Riemann homeworld. Every human ship was battered and scarred, but their weapons were primed and the crews ready. They all knew the odds. They all knew the price of failure. This was humanity's last stand. Joshua watched the target grow in the view screen, his heart an echoing drum. He whispered an ancient battle prayer as the Earth ships screamed into the jaws of hell, laser fire erupting around them. There was no going back. The fate of the human race hung by a thread. It was victory or extinction. No other options remained. The diplomatic shuttle glided through the inky void of space, its occupants tense with the weight of their mission. Joshua sat rigid in his seat, exchanging a nervous glance with Sirius. The Earth Fleet Admiral paced the cabin while Riemann officials huddled in hushed conversation. A violent shudder rocked the shuttle. Alarms blared as the hull breached. Armored figures swarmed through the opening, weapons raised. "Riemann hardliners!" Sirius shouted, diving for cover. Joshua reacted instantly, tackling the Admiral behind a bulkhead as energy bolts sizzled past. The cabin erupted in chaos. Screams and weapons fire filled the air as the radicals seized control. "We need to reach the bridge!" Joshua yelled to Sirius over the din. They fought their way forward, Joshua's military training kicking in as he moved with fluid precision. Sirius matched him step for step, the unlikely allies perfectly in sync. On the bridge, Joshua's fingers flew over the controls. "I've locked out critical systems, but they still control life support." A radical's face appeared on the screen. "Surrender or we space the hostages." Joshua's mind raced. He spotted a planetoid on sensors and an insane plan formed. "Strap in!" he ordered, yanking the controls. The shuttle lurched violently, hurtling towards the barren rock. Sirius's eyes widened. "You're insane!" "Trust me," Joshua gritted out. The planetoid filled the view screen. At the last second, Joshua punched the jettison control. The bridge module tore free as the rest of the shuttle disintegrated on impact. They hit hard, the module skidding across rocky terrain before grinding to a halt. Joshua's head swam as he unbuckled. "Everyone okay?" Groans answered him. As the dust settled, Joshua and Sirius stumbled out to survey their surroundings. A hellish landscape of jagged stone and sulfurous vents greeted them. A distant explosion drew their attention. An escape pod had landed nearby. Figures emerged. The Riemann radicals had survived. Both groups warily approached, weapons drawn. Joshua stepped forward, hands raised. This conflict will destroy us all. We must find a way to... A roar split the air. Massive shapes moved in the mists. Razor-sharp claws glinted. "Take cover!" Joshua shouted. Human and Riemann alike scrambled for shelter as nightmarish predators converged on the crash site. Joshua locked eyes with the radical leader. "Truce?" he asked. The Riemann nodded grimly. "Truce. For now." As they barricaded themselves in the wreckage, Joshua knew their real battle was just beginning. Somehow, they had to survive this hellscape long enough to save their peoples from mutual annihilation. Joshua's boots crunched on the rocky soil as he trudged through the alien landscape, Sirius at his side. The sulphurous stench burned his nostrils. Sweat trickled down his back despite the chill air. "Look!" Sirius hissed, pointing with a clawed hand. Joshua squinted. A glint of metal peeked through dense, purple-leafed foliage. They approached cautiously, pushing aside the thick vegetation. An old Earth Defense Fleet escape pod lay half-buried in the alien soil. Its hull was pitted and scarred, the once proud insignia barely visible beneath a layer of grime. "It's one of ours," Joshua breathed. He ran his hand over the cool metal. "But it's been here for years." They pried open the hatch. The stale air inside reeked of decay. Joshua's stomach lurched as he saw the desiccated corpse strapped into the pilot's seat. A tattered uniform hung from its skeletal frame. "Poor bastard," Joshua muttered. "He survived the crash, but this planet got him in the end." Sirius examined the ancient controls. "The power core still functions. Perhaps we can salvage useful data." Joshua nodded, pushing aside his revulsion to access the computer core. His fingers danced over the archaic interface. "There. I've got something." The cracked display flickered to life, showing a star chart of the surrounding systems. Joshua's eyes widened. This changes everything. There's a human outpost. We can get help." Sirius leaned in, his reptilian eyes narrowing. "How far?" Joshua's excitement faded as he studied the map. 6 months on foot, through some of the nastiest terrain I've ever seen. They shared a grim look. Both knew what that meant, a harrowing journey with slim odds of survival. Back at the crash site, tension crackled between the human and Riemann survivors. Weapons were drawn, voices raised in anger. Joshua stepped between the factions, hands raised. "Listen to me. We've found a way off this rock, but we'll never make it if we're at each other's throats. Our only chance is to work together." The Riemann radical leader snarled. "Why should we trust you, human?" Sirius stepped forward. "Because he speaks the truth. This planet will kill us all if we don't unite." Slowly, reluctantly, weapons lowered. The next days were a flurry of activity as they salvaged what they could from the wreckage. Sheets of metal became crude shelters. Broken struts were fashioned into spears. As the ragtag convoy set out, Joshua felt the weight of leadership settle heavily on his shoulders. He knew the grueling journey ahead would test them all. They hacked through dense jungle, the air thick and humid. Alien insects buzzed incessantly. Strange cries echoed in the distance, setting everyone on edge. Water became scarce as they climbed into rugged mountains. Joshua watched their supplies dwindle with growing concern. Tempers flared as thirst and exhaustion took their toll. A human soldier and Riemann warrior came to blows over a pitiful stream. Joshua waded in, separating them. "Enough! We share equally or we all die." Sirius backed him up, his presence a steadying influence on the Riemanns. Together, they kept the fragile peace. Weeks turned to months. The terrain grew ever more treacherous. They scaled sheer cliffs, the wind howling around them. They slogged through fetid swamps, fighting off leech-like creatures that dropped from overhanging vines. Joshua and Sirius grew closer, their shared trials forging a bond stronger than steel. They spent long nights planning, strategizing how to keep the group alive and moving forward. One dawn, they crested a ridge to find a small valley below. Huddled figures moved about a makeshift camp. "More survivors," Joshua breathed. As they approached, weapons were leveled at them. Joshua raised his hands. We're not here to fight. We have a way off this planet, but we need to work together. It took hours of tense negotiation, but eventually the new group agreed to join them. The convoy swelled in size, a mix of humans and remans united by desperation. Their numbers attracted attention. Massive predators began stalking the group. Dorsal fins cut through the tall grass. Savage roars split the night. The attack, when it came, was swift and brutal. Joshua fired his cobbled-together weapon as tooth and claw tore into their ranks. Humans and remans fought side by side, their old hatreds forgotten in the face of a common enemy. When the dust settled, they had prevailed, but at a terrible cost. The ground was littered with bodies, human and reman alike. Joshua worked tirelessly, treating the wounded with their dwindling medical supplies. He set broken bones, stitched gaping wounds, comforted the dying. His impartial care for all survivors, regardless of species, did not go unnoticed. At last, after 6 grueling months, they reached the final mountain range. Hope surged through the battered convoy as they made the climb. Joshua's heart soared as he spotted the outpost in the valley below. "We made it," he said, clasping Sirius on the shoulder. "We actually made it." But as they drew closer, his elation turned to ash. The outpost was a hive of activity, but not human activity. Alien warriors swarmed over the defenses, their crude weapons and patchwork armor a far cry from Earth military tech. Joshua's mind raced. They had come too far to turn back now. He turned to the assembled humans and remans, his voice ringing out. "I know I'm asking the impossible, but we have one chance to take that outpost and get off this hellhole. Who's with me?" A ragged cheer went up. Joshua nodded to Sirius, and together they began to plan their final, desperate assault. Joshua wiped the sweat from his brow as he surveyed the bustling activity around him. The cavernous hangar of the alien outpost echoed with the sound of engines firing up and the urgent shouts of humans and remans working side by side to load the last of the survivors onto the waiting transports. "That's the last of them," Sirius called out, his scaled hand gripping a datapad. "We're ready for final departure." Joshua nodded, relief washing over him. They had done it. Against adversity, they had secured this godforsaken outpost and found a way off this hellish planet. He opened his mouth to give the order to launch when a shrill alarm cut through the air. "Sir!" A young human technician sprinted towards them, panic etched on his face. "Long-range sensors just lit up. We've got multiple contacts entering the system." Joshua's blood ran cold. He rushed to the nearest console, Sirius hot on his heels. The sensor display confirmed his worst fears. A massive fleet of alien ships, their signatures matching the marauders they had fought to claim this outpost. "They've called for reinforcements," Sirius hissed, his reptilian eyes narrowing. Joshua's mind raced. They couldn't fight, not with their meager forces and the transports full of civilians. But if they all fled, the aliens would simply retake the outpost and potentially pursue them. They needed a distraction, something to buy time for the evacuation and hopefully cripple the enemy in the process. He turned to the assembled human and reman commanders. "I have a plan, but it's risky as hell." As Joshua laid out his audacious scheme, he saw the mix of fear and drive in their eyes. They all knew the stakes. "Who's with me?" Joshua asked, his voice steady despite the churning in his gut. One by one, a small group of volunteers stepped forward, a mix of hardened human soldiers and battle-scarred reman warriors. Joshua nodded grimly. "Sirius, I need you to lead the evacuation. Get our people to safety." The reman clasped Joshua's arm, his grip firm. "Don't you dare die out here." As the transports roared to life, Joshua and his skeleton crew raced through the outpost. They worked feverishly, rigging explosives to key structural points and overloading the fusion reactors that powered the base. The distant rumble of the alien fleet's approach spurred them on. Joshua's hands flew over the communication controls as the last transport cleared the atmosphere. He broadcast on all frequencies, his voice dripping with manufactured bravado. "Attention, alien scum! You want this outpost? Come and take it from us, we're waiting." He cut the transmission, praying the aliens took the bait. Minutes ticked by, each second an eternity. Then the sensors screamed. The Marauder fleet had entered weapons range. "Incoming!" someone shouted as the first salvo struck. The outpost shuddered under the barrage. Joshua waited, counting down in his head. Not yet, not yet. The aliens pressed their attack, raining death from above. Dust and debris filled the air as sections of the outpost began to collapse. "Now!" Joshua roared. They sprinted for the alien dropship they had captured earlier, clambering aboard as the structure groaned around them. Joshua punched the ignition, the engine sputtering to life. They burst from the hangar just as the outpost erupted in a cataclysmic explosion. The shock wave slammed into their ship, alarms blaring as systems failed. Joshua fought the controls, struggling to keep them airborne as they plummeted towards the surface of a nearby moon. The impact rattled Joshua's teeth. His head slammed against the console, and darkness claimed him. He awoke to the acrid smell of smoke and the groan of twisted metal. Blinking away blood from a gash on his forehead, Joshua took stock of their situation. The dropship was a wreck, but miraculously, most of his crew had survived the crash. As they staggered from the ruined vessel, Joshua gazed at the alien landscape stretching before them. Jagged peaks loomed in the distance under a starry sky untouched by atmosphere. The surface was pockmarked with craters and strewn with razor-sharp rocks. "We need shelter," Joshua said, his voice hoarse, "and we need to get that distress beacon working." They salvaged what they could from the wreckage, fashioning crude tools and makeshift weapons. Joshua knew their ordeal was far from finished. They had survived the crash, but now they faced an even greater challenge, staying alive on this desolate moon until help arrived. If help arrived. Joshua's eyes snapped open as the hypersphere shuddered violently. The quantum slipstream drive hummed with raw power, its exotic energies contained within the storage matrix they'd risked everything to obtain. He hauled himself to his feet, steadying himself against a bulkhead as the ship lurched again. "Status report," he barked, striding onto the bridge. A human officer with a freshly bandaged arm looked up from her console. "Multiple Riemann warships on an intercept course, sir. They formed a blockade ahead." Joshua's expression resolute as he studied the tactical display. A wall of enemy vessels stretched across their path, weapons primed and hungry for vengeance. "Evasive maneuvers," he ordered. "We need to find a gap in their formation." The hypersphere banked hard, its inertial dampeners straining to compensate. Joshua gripped the command chair as space outside the viewports blurred into streaks of light. A Riemann crew member called out from the sensor station. "Sir, they're launching fighters." Joshua watched as swarms of smaller craft peeled away from the larger ships, their engines flaring as they closed in on the stolen hypersphere. "Weapons free," Joshua commanded. "Target their engines and weapon systems only. We're not here to start another war." The hypersphere's point defense turrets sprang to life, spitting streams of energy bolts into the void. Enemy fighters exploded in silent blooms of fire and debris. "Sir, I've found a potential opening," the helmsman reported. "It's tight, but we might be able to slip through." Joshua nodded. "Do it. All power to engines and shields." The hypersphere surged forward, diving towards a narrow gap between two massive Riemann dreadnoughts. Alarms blared as enemy fire raked their shields. "Hull breach on deck 3, someone shouted. "Seal it off," Joshua ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Maintain course." The ship bucked and trembled as it threaded the needle between the enemy vessels. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed they wouldn't make it. Then they were through, the blockade falling behind them as they accelerated towards open space. A cheer went up on the bridge, but Joshua knew their ordeal was a long way to go. "Set course for Earth, maximum speed. We're not out of this yet." As the hypersphere hurtled through the void, Joshua's thoughts turned to the billions suffering back on Earth. The precious energy they carried was their only hope. He prayed they would make it in time. The ship's communication array crackled to life. A familiar voice, distorted by static, filled the bridge. "Joshua? Do you read me? This is serious?" Joshua's heart leapt. "Serious? Where are you? What's your status? I've managed to secure a research facility on Luna, Sirius replied. We're ready to begin synthesizing the counteragent as soon as you arrive with the energy source. Joshua allowed himself a small smile. We're on our way, old friend. Just hold on a little longer. As he cut the transmission, Joshua's willpower hardened. They had the key to saving humanity. Now they just had to make it home alive. The hypersphere plunged deeper into space, Earth's solar system a distant pinprick of light. Behind them, the engines of the Riemann Armada flared to life as they gave chase. The hypersphere shuddered violently as it tore through another quantum slipstream. Joshua gripped the command console, his fingers tightening as the ship's hull groaned under the strain. "Reactor temperature critical," shouted the engineer, her face slick with sweat. "We can't take another jump." Joshua's eyes darted across the tactical display. A swarm of Riemann warships pursued relentlessly, their weapons primed to obliterate the stolen craft and its precious cargo. "One more," Joshua ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Plot a course for the edge of human space." The hypersphere lurched as it plunged into the final slipstream. Alarms blared throughout the ship as systems failed one by one. With a deafening crack, they erupted back into normal space, tumbling end over end amidst a field of shattered debris. "Reactor's going critical," the engineer screamed. "We need to abandon ship now." Joshua smacked his head on the evacuation alarm. "All hands to escape pods. Move." He snatched up the quantum energy matrix, cradling the pulsing device as he sprinted through the disintegrating corridors. Crew members scrambled into pods, the sounds of panicked breathing and slamming hatches filling the air. Joshua dove into the last pod just as the hypersphere's superstructure began to buckle. The pod jettisoned, hurling them into the void. Through the viewport, he watched as the hypersphere imploded in a blinding flash of quantum energy. Silence fell as the pod drifted. Joshua's heart pounded in his ears as he scanned for signs of pursuit. Suddenly, a massive shape loomed before them, an Earth dreadnought, part of the Vanguard fleet. A tractor beam locked onto their pod, drawing them into a cavernous hangar bay. As the hatch hissed open, Joshua found himself face to face with a grizzled fleet admiral. "Cutting it a bit close, weren't you?" the admiral growled, eyeing the energy matrix. "Get that thing to the transport, we've got a gauntlet to run." Joshua nodded grimly, following the admiral through a warren of corridors to a heavily armored ship. As they secured the matrix, klaxons began to wail throughout the fleet. "Multiple Riemann signatures detected!" a tactical officer shouted. "They found us!" The admiral's face hardened. "All ships, battle stations. We make our stand here." Joshua strapped himself into the transport's command chair as the human fleet formed up around them. Through the view screen, he watched as an armada of Riemann warships dropped out of slipspace, their weapons already charging. "For Earth," Joshua whispered as the two fleets clashed in a maelstrom of fire and death. The fabric of reality shuddered as Sirius unleashed his quantum powers. Space itself buckled and warped around the Terran Vanguard fleet, their ships gliding through impossible geometries as they engaged the Riemann reinforcements. On the bridge of his flagship, Sirius stood with arms outstretched, channeling energies beyond mortal comprehension. His eyes blazed with inner light as he spoke in a voice that echoed across dimensions. "Brightest adepts, focus your will, unravel their very atoms." Around him, robed figures chanted in eerie harmony, their combined psychic force lashing out at the enemy armada. Riemann ships twisted and distorted, their hulls splitting apart at the subatomic level. Entire cruisers vanished in flashes of otherworldly radiance, scattered to the cosmic winds. Vanguard knights soared through the void on wings of psionic energy, wielding burning blades of pure thought. They cleaved through Riemann vessels with impossible precision, their weapons ignoring physical laws to slice clean through shields and armor. "Push them back," Sirius commanded. "Show them the true meaning of transcendence." His own vessel, a biomechanical leviathan of fused human and Riemann technology, bristled with arcane weaponry. At his mental command, reality-warping cannons fired, each blast spawning miniature black holes that consumed everything in their path. Yet for every Raymond ship they destroyed, more poured in from across the Empire. The space around Earth swarmed with enemy vessels, an endless tide of destruction. Aboard the Raymond flagship, the Grand Imperator watched in mounting horror as his fleet was decimated, his reptilian features contorted in a snarl of rage and disbelief. "Impossible!" he hissed. "These vermin have unlocked the ancestral gift. They wield it with more power than we ever dreamed possible." A subordinate approached, trembling. "Great One, we cannot withstand their assault. Our forces are being obliterated faster than we can replace them." The Imperator's eyes narrowed to slits. "Then we shall deny them their victory. Bring me the nullifier." Deep within the bowels of his ship, an ancient device stirred to life. Older than the Riemann Empire itself, it pulsed with unfathomable energies. As the Imperator activated its arcane systems, reality itself began to fray at the edges. Sirius sensed the disturbance instantly. "No," he breathed. "They wouldn't dare." But it was too late. A wave of anti-reality erupted from the Riemann flagship, sweeping across the Sol system. Earth, its defenders, and the invading fleet alike were engulfed in a maelstrom of unreality. Sirius felt the quantum tethers binding him to normal space-time snap one by one. His flagship, along with the remnants of the Vanguard fleet, tumbled into a yawning void beyond the boundaries of existence itself. As the last vestiges of familiar reality faded, Sirius found himself adrift in a nightmarish realm of half-formed possibilities. Ghost fleets from long-dead universes drifted silently around them, locked in eternal, unmoving battle. The shattered husks of alien megastructures loomed in the distance, frozen between moments of creation and annihilation. Sirius gazed out at this graveyard of lost infinities, his heart pounding from the scale of the cosmic catastrophe. He turned to address the shell-shocked crew on his bridge. "My friends," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos, "we have been cast into the spaces between realities, but do not despair. For in this prison of anti-existence, we shall forge the keys to our own liberation and to the freedom of all creation."
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.